A mere formality, or a portrait of the modern world in 7 sad machines. In this talk, as the subtitle suggests, I sketch a portrait of the modern world in 7 sad machines. Sad Machine 1. The Opportunity Rover. My battery is low. And it's getting dark. Many of us felt a heart spasm when we first read these words, the last transmission from the Opportunity robot, stranded on the surface of Mars. A diligent non-human NASA employee, which had been doing its job so conscientiously for 15 years, was now succumbing to a kind of mechanical mortality. The pathos was pure, even if the rover's last words were condensed for poetic effect. The robot, also known as Opportunity, or OPI for short, surprised its makers in terms of its resilience on the red planet, so far from home, as well as for its work ethic. Long after scientists assumed it would have succumbed to rust, radiation, or some other interstellar malady, OPI continued to forage, explore, sample, and send missives home. It was like some kind of plucky character from a Pixar movie. Except it was real. In the end, a massive dust storm was the thing that did the rover in. As Abigail Freeman, one of the project managers, explained, by Thursday, we knew that it was bad. And then by Friday, we knew it was really bad, but there was nothing we could do but watch. And then it was Sunday, we actually got a communication from the rover, and we were shocked. It basically said we had no power left. Apparently OPI was overcome with a kind of awe at the sight of the approaching wall of rust-colored dust, about to engulf all its sensors like a sublime tsunami. Indeed, the rover's last words essentially said, "The skies are incredibly dark. No sunlight is getting through. It's night time during the day." Is the pang many of us felt at this story merely a viral case of the pathetic fallacy, so potent that even scientists were not immune from it? Or is there something objectively sad about a machine with a purpose, left to face its end on its own, perhaps the only moving thing on the planet, exposed to the alien elements in a way, and on a scale, that no human has yet to experience? No doubt, the philosophers can argue about whether the pathetic fallacy is in fact a fallacy or not until philosophy itself faces the same entropic fate as the Mars rover. But we would submit that there is indeed something powerfully poignant about such a scenario as this, not isolated to, or explained away by, the eye of the human beholder. Perhaps there is a seam of sorrow threaded through the universe that humans may be the most sensitive to, or maybe not, but in any case affects the universe in different ways, even where, and when, life is absent. Creatures no doubt experienced sad situations long before there were humans around to witness or record them. Trees, after all, certainly fell in the forest many millions of years before Homo sapiens came along, to question the sound that these timber giants most definitely made. Who are we to presume that trees don't mourn the collapse of one of their neighbors? Perhaps it's a form of arrogance to assume that only humans can experience what Spinoza called the sad passions, and what Virgil called the sadness in things. Perhaps even a courageous laborer, made of the world's most expensive nuts and bolts, is imbricated in an effective atmosphere, as much as an elemental one. Sad Machine 2. Sputnik 2. The first female in space was not, as commonly considered, Valentina Tereshkova, in 1963, but Laika the dog, nearly 6 years earlier. We tend to forget this detail, even as Laika herself has become a tragic near-mythical figure, embodying the ambitions and follies of the Cold War space race. Notably, all space dogs in the Soviet program, of which there were dozens, were female, since there was no room in the nose cone of the rocket ships for male dogs to lift their leg up and relieve themselves. Laika herself was sourced, like all her other canine cosmonaut comrades, from the streets of Moscow. Scientists, armed with tape measures, poached amiable strays and brought them to the Institute of Aviation Medicine. After distinguishing herself in training, Laika was ultimately chosen for not only her cool temperament under pressure, but her photogenic visage and pleasing silhouette. A different dog, Albina, actually performed better in most tests leading up to the launch, but was not deemed as attractive. The space race was, after all, just as much an artifact of marketing and propaganda than astrophysical achievements. Laika was chosen to orbit the Earth in Sputnik 2, a larger and more ambitious satellite than the unmanned one which had shot across the headlines of the world less than a month earlier. As a result, the Western media initially nicknamed Laika Mutnik. Under pressure to ensure this second launch was timed to coincide with the 40th anniversary of the Russian Revolution, shortcuts were made. And while there was no expectation, from the beginning, that Laika would survive the journey, she was supposed to be spared too much trauma on her heroic flight, designed to pave the way for human space travel soon after. Sputnik 2 launched successfully on November 3, 1957. And official Soviet news outlets reported a healthy passenger for the first few days. Decades later, we would learn that these were in fact lies, and that poor Laika perished around 7 hours after liftoff, after enduring terrible stress and unbearable temperatures. As a result, this first creature to leave the Earth's orbit, presumably in the history of the planet, circled the globe as a singed corpse for 5 long months, before finally receiving an organic cremation, when Sputnik 2 disintegrated re-entering the Earth's atmosphere on April 14, 1958. The English newspapers called Laika the fuzziest, loneliest, unhappiest dog in the world. After she was pronounced dead by Soviet officials, her demise was framed as a noble sacrifice toward a more glorious, interplanetary future. Indeed, Laika was not the first of such sacrifices, and it is estimated that at least 15 dogs died during suborbital launch experiments in the 1950s. While the reaction in the West was mostly one of outrage, fanned by the growing animal rights movement, the US did not exactly have firm footing on the moral high ground, as several species of chimp and monkey died during experiments and test flights on the American side of the space race. Indeed, as recently as 2019, NASA euthanized 27 monkeys in a single day, at one of their research facilities. Dogs were preferred to chimps in the USSR because simians, like humans, required more training and vaccines. Additionally, primates were deemed emotionally unstable and fidgety by the USSR scientists in charge of animal discipline. We might pause, then, to consider what it really means that the first living being to reach outer space was, on the one hand, not human, and on the other hand, not truly cognizant of her mission. Today, our sentimental hearts spasm at the thought of an adorable, innocent animal, strapped into a capsule and roasted alive, to better pave the way for human spaceflight. The Soviet scientists at the time, however, considered dogs as quasi-comrades, fellow pioneers, and willing allies, for the glory of all humankind. This did not prevent, however, belated remorse. As Oleg Gazenko, a medical officer involved in the program, noted, "The more time passes, the more I'm sorry about it. We shouldn't have done it. We did not learn enough from the mission to justify the death of the dog." It is a question of perspective, then, whether these dogs were merely fulfilling their deeper evolutionary mission, as our obedient, best friends, or if they were hoodwinked from the beginning, doomed as soon as the first wolf crept too close to the primal human fire. Remarkably, animals were involved in experiments, with space travel in mind, conducted as early as 1897. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, for instance, known as the father of the cosmonaut program, managed to increase the mass of a chicken by a factor of 10, while simulating intense gravitational forces, using a centrifuge of his own invention. But why involve non-humans at all? Why scoop them up and strap them down in the rickety manifestation of our own pathology, our own misguided passion for a cosmic escape plan? On what grounds can we justify sending up fuzzy surrogates to test the temperature of the astral waters, even when, as in the happier case of Belka and Strelka, the four-legged cosmonauts return alive and in one piece? Surely this is little more than a case of cowardice. Ignoble, in any case. Non-human cosmonauts and astronauts complicate the image of ourselves as the lone starfaring species, at least in potentia. And this glitch in our own self-image can occasionally happen in public, as when Yuri Gagarin followed the initial trajectory of Laika to become the first human to leave the Earth's atmosphere. Upon his return to terra firma, he is said to have joked, "Am I the first human in space, or the last dog?" Sad Machine 3. The Mir space station. When heading out into space, you cannot count on things being the same when you return. So learned Russian engineer and cosmonaut, Sergei Konstantinovich Krikalev, after blasting off to spend a planned 5 months in the Mir space station, which circled the Earth from 1986 to 2001. Krikalev arrived in orbit safely, via a Soyuz rocket, in May 1991, and promptly began running various experiments, safety checks, and maintenance routines. No doubt the cosmonaut experienced cold feet about heading into the heavens when events were so uncertain on the ground, especially in his native Russia. For the past 18 months, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the various countries comprising the Soviet Union were falling to revolutions and other upheavals, like dominoes. The entire Eastern Bloc was in tumult. As a model citizen, however, Krikalev put on his spacesuit and set forth for the Mir, a tangible reminder of the supremacy with which the Soviets had helped initiate the space race. When October arrived, and when Krikalev should have been strapping in to return to his loved ones on terra firma, he was surely perturbed to learn that his orders had changed. Even more disconcerting, Krikalev found no clarity around who was in charge anymore, and thus who was authorized to issue orders in the first place. The world's first spaceport, the Baikonur Cosmodrome, from which the Soyuz rockets came and went, was based in Kazakhstan, which had recently gained independence. The fate of his mission, indeed the fate of the space station itself, was suddenly anything but certain. As a result, Krikalev was obliged to bide his time, after the rest of the crew had left, and continue to maintain the Mir, an endearingly messy vessel, which several cosmonauts, in contrast to the pragmatic Americans on the International Space Station nearby, considered a living organism, like a kind of metal maternal womb. Thankfully food supplies, while flavorless and modest, were not yet an issue, and Krikalev spent his time talking to amateur radio enthusiasts back on Earth, who had recently learned how to patch into his satellite communications system. One person in particular, pilot, folk dancer, polyglot, literacy consultant, and amateur radio enthusiast, Margaret Yakinto, kept Krikalev company over the ham channel, records showing that he chatted with her almost every day, for a year. We can only imagine how Krikalev felt when, the day after Christmas, the Soviet Union was formally dissolved. After 311 days, however, twice as long as his planned mission, Krikalev finally touched down back on Earth, after an international team of scientists secured his safe return. Given the fact that this hardy cosmonaut left the surface during one historical epoch and came back during another, Krikalev is sometimes referred to as the last Soviet citizen. Less fortunate than Krikalev are the astronauts ejected into orbit by an exploded rocket, in Ray Bradbury's evocative short story, Kaleidoscope. The tale opens with the disaster. The first concussion cut the rocket up the side with a giant can opener. The men were thrown into space like a dozen wriggling silverfish. They were scattered into a dark sea, and the ship, in a million pieces, went on, a meteor swarm seeking a lost Sunday. One of the doomed astronauts, Hollis, has the perhaps comforting honor of heading directly back towards Earth, and begins feeling the gravitational tug of the outer atmosphere. In a twist on so many killer comet scenarios, Hollis finds himself in the position of hurtling towards the surface. He fell swiftly, like a bullet, like a pebble, like an iron weight, objective all of the time now, not sad or happy or anything, but only wishing he could do a good thing now that everything was gone, a good thing for just himself to know about. When I hit the atmosphere, I'll burn like a meteor. I wonder, he said, if anyone'll see me. Down on Earth, at precisely the same moment, a mother and her child are watching the night sky. Look, Mom, look. A falling star, says the boy. Make a wish, says his mother. Make a wish. Sad Machine 4. Blue Orbital. 2 decades after the Mir space station was called back home, to disintegrate in the Earth's atmosphere and scatter into the southern Pacific Ocean, 3 billionaires were sublimating primal phallic urges into a new space race for the world's richest citizens. In 2021, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Richard Branson all launched private vessels into the upper atmosphere, in a bid to reboot the golden age of space exploration, but now with a strident entrepreneurial bent, favoring rich tourists over highly trained cosmonauts. Richard Branson's vessel, Blue Orbital, was notable for one of its 4 passengers, William Shatner, the actor playing the captain of the Starship Enterprise in the original Star Trek series. In a supremely Baudrillardian moment, television and actuality fused into a nostalgic hyperreality, as if, since Reagan perhaps, we need the blessing of an avatar of the spectacle in order to make any aspirationally historic scenario feel real. For his part, Shatner, a longtime self-parodying figure of ironic camp and high kitsch, surfing the long wave of the Star Trek franchise into his 90s, seemed genuinely shaken on his return, not mentally prepared for confronting the real that extends forever beyond both the domesticated reality of terrestrial life and the false bubbles of pseudo-reality that flicker on our TV screens. The covering of blue, he said, at the post-landing press conference. This sheet, this blanket, this comforter that we have around. We think, oh, that's blue sky. Then suddenly you shoot through it all of a sudden, as though you're whipping a sheet off you when you're asleep, and you're looking into blackness, into black ugliness. Shatner, for all the world an aged Captain Kirk, departed from his famous character in being visibly haunted by the brute fact of having gone where no man has gone before. He groped for the words to convey his existential vertigo. You look down, he added. There's the blue down there. Comforting Mother Earth. And then the black up there. Shatner looked around the room, his eyes trying to adjust to the enclosed space, having just lost a staring competition with infinity. He then asked the assembled reporters, as if hoping for an answer, is that death? I don't know. Sad Machine 5. The Jamarams in David R. Bunch singular and surreal science fiction epic, Mode Ran, we visit a picaresque brave new future, in which people vie for mechanical augmentation, and compete to escape nature into a vast and macho simulacrum, known as Mode Ran, or The New Processes. Written in the 1960s and 70s, the height of both the cybernetic revolution and the techno-skeptical New Wave writings it spawned, Modron's tale is a playful, yet also deeply serious, reflection on the emergent transhumanist tendencies of the late 20th century, and as such it has much to say about our ongoing struggles with fantasies of Promethean transcendence through technology. Often reading as the pop art bastard child of Gerard Manley Hopkins and Anthony Burgess, critically channeling Ayn Rand, Mode Ran begins with a description of the homegrown terraforming, or rather, terradeforming, that must be accomplished and maintained by formidable herds of Jamarams, long-legged tamping machines, that were huge black cylinders swung spinning between gigantic thighs and calves of metal. The description of their task, provided by an obliging overseer, is worth quoting in full. Surely you must know that the earth is poisoned. From what I've heard, where you are from is not only poisoned, but wrecked and cindered as well. We stopped just short of that havoc up here, therefore there is this place for you from old land to come to. But our land was poisoned by science, progress, as much as yours was. So we're covering all with the sterile plastic, a great big white-gray envelope of thick tough sterile plastic over all the land of the earth. That's our goal. It's a mammoth task, but for mammoth tasks man has behemoth machines. The mountains go into the valleys, the creek banks go into the creeks, the ditch sides go into the ditches, the golf courses are smoothed, the mine tailings are scattered, and all is coated. At the necessary places we make the reservoirs for runoff and freeze it solid. The oceans we will deal with in our own time and well enough. There are several plans, one being to use our scientific know-how to freeze the oceans solid, another being to shoot the oceans out into space in capsules and be done with all that surplus water forever. The new metal man, which I am to a degree, and which you are to become to a much higher degree, will need very little water. But now it's the land we're doing. The water is a later task. But when we get all through, I visualize an earth of such tranquility and peace in nature that it must be the true marvel of all the ages. The surface of our globe will be a smooth tough gray-white hide. When our water plans are finalized, the rainfall will be no more. No more will man be fleeing floods anywhere in the world. In cloudless heavens the winds will have died in our even temperatures, no more will man go sky high in the twisters. The air will hang as a tranquil envelope over essentially a smooth gray ball, the smoothness being broken only by the strongholds and the bubble dome homes. Trees, if we want them, will spring up from the yard holes at the flick of a switch. The flowers will bloom just right and on time in wonderful bloom metal. Animals, there will be no animals, unless we should want a few tigers and lions and such, all mechanical of course, for a staged jungle hunt. Yes. It will be a land for forever, ordered and sterilized. That's the dream. The author of this passage surely hoped that the reader would find such a dream much closer to a nightmare. Who, after all, is so alienated that they would rather live in a technological simulation than the real world, no matter how damaged or forsaken the latter? But as we also know, there is currently no shortage of influential people who do indeed dream in this register, despite all the warnings from the last century, and who are already attempting to usher us all into either the metaverse, Mars, a treeless Amazon forest of compulsive consumption, an engineered environment, complete with man-made weather, or a prismatic city made almost entirely of mirrors. Even as I write, one of our best-selling big thinkers, Yuval Noah Harari, has gone on record as saying, "We just don't need the vast majority of the population." Indeed, according to this top advisor to the World Economic Forum, advances in AI, machine learning, and bioengineering render most of the Earth's humans redundant, a view that only makes a micron of sense if people are valued as nothing other than an anonymous reservoir for labor. Who constitutes the "we" in Harari's original statement is, of course, the unspoken assumption behind all these neo-fascistic techno-social arrangements. And remarkably, even the new metal warlords of Modran are more compassionate than this real-life policy shaper, as their superhuman elites eventually decide to begrudgingly be left irrevocably saddled with these rheumatic old ladies, these bummy old men, these meaningless futured young girls and all the rest of the underpar ragtag of humanity. Grand and global technical solutions, it seems, will forever be presented as the answer to problems created by the previous round of technical solutions. The novel's narrator is, initially at least, disturbed by the mission of the Jamarams. I for one would call it more than a small cosmic miracle if man, a spark of life tediously evolved from the dead cold elements himself, should so organize his forces as to rearrange those elements to have essentially a dead cold planet again before he departed. It would seem to me a dismal, and more than a little depressing, closing of the ring, for sure. But after undergoing an elaborate operation to replace most of his flesh strips with gleaming new metal, pain-crammed rebuilding, he is seduced by the hegemonic logic of the new processes, and thereafter repulsed by the idea of life before or underneath the global crust of plastic. Even at its height, however, Modran was not, we are told, entirely free of the burden of the ragtag flesh people. How painful to witness, for instance, unaugmented humans talk, wet slop slopping gristle meat tongue doing a dance, wind in the windpipe working, God! What an old-fashioned method just to communicate a few verbal salutes. Even so, the new Metal Man protagonist rejoices in escaping the seething yeasty world. He becomes a local warlord, as expected of him, after inheriting the fortification of Stronghold 10. Here he is visited by different figures, a child, a poet, a horseman, and so on, who suggest other ways of being. After much complex cogitation, he begins to question the wisdom of all these machines of loving grace that control every aspect of life in Modran, to the extent that his own thoughts are no longer simply switch-functional and normal toggles. Instead, own catch in the smooth workings, a malfunction of the joy trims. In the heart and mind now, clawing the good times down, negating all his tall ambitions, selling short his many longings for power, everything now sunken to ciphers. Bunch's novel is a complex, lurid, nuanced riposte to the shrugging atlases of this world. And we can only hope that the new metal men of our own strongholds are finally, similarly, troubled by loading airborne zeros and great blank rectangles of levitated nothing. Sad Machine 6 Hitchbot. In 2013, two Canadian experts on human-robot interaction, David Harris Smith and Frog Zeller, devised a whimsical experiment to test the extent to which robots can place their faith in the humans that, collectively speaking, created them. The experiment centered on a cute robotic hitchhiker called Hitchbot, which was powered by solar energy and equipped with a GPS locator, 3G wireless connection, and a camera. Consistent with the average human hitchhiker, Hitchbot was also able to carry on basic conversation and talk about facts. The question behind the experiment was simple: can humans be trusted to help a fellow humanoid traveler explore the world? The answer to the first few tests, conducted in Canada, Germany, and the Netherlands, was a resounding yes, as curious and kind-hearted people who encountered Hitchbot helped it get to its desired next destination, brought it to convivial gatherings, and ensured that it could complete several tasks itemized on its own personal bucket list, such as attend a concert, travel in the cockpit of a plane, or explore the canals of Amsterdam. Hitchbot's adventures were recorded on its own Twitter feed, as well as through the accounts of those who encountered it. And while the philosophers and scientists may bicker about the extent to which Hitchbot was really enjoying, or even experiencing, these adventures, the sense of a plucky, low-tech nomad was effectively evoked by the whole enterprise. In 2015, however, things took a dark turn, when after only a few days into its journey across the US, Hitchbot was assaulted, decapitated, and stripped for parts in Philadelphia. After starting the trip so optimistically, in Boston, Hitchbot had taken in a baseball game at the famous Fenway Stadium. It even managed to safely navigate the hectic streets of Manhattan. On the first day of August, Hitchbot tweeted, "The East Coast has been swell, but it's time to head westward. I have been California dreaming." A few hours later, seemingly from beyond the grave, two final tweets registered the bad news. The first said, "Oh dear, my body was damaged, but I live on with all my friends. Sometimes bad things happen to good robots." And this was followed by some final words, truly Christ-like in their capacity for infinite forgiveness. "My trip must come to an end for now, but my love for humans will never fade. Thanks friends." Hitchbot's bucket-shaped head, the news reports noted, was never found. We can speculate whether the experiment yielded a positive judgment regarding humans, except for one unfortunate bad apple, or if it ultimately proved that robots should never fully trust the species that created them. Perhaps the moral of the story is that robots should not trust Americans, or more specifically Philadelphians. In any case, Hitchbot never had the chance to check off its ambitious bucket list for the US, which included seeing the Cloud Gate in Chicago, hearing jazz music in New Orleans, and having a flutter over the betting tables in Las Vegas. At any rate, the whole experiment neatly inverted the concerns of Isaac Asimov's famous 3 laws of robotics, which, with an eye cast firmly back to the lessons of Dr. Frankenstein, were designed to protect humans from any harmful acting out by their technological progeny. In this case, however, we were obliged to consider the far more likely scenario, at least in the short term, that of parental abuse. Sad Machine 7. The typical American suffer little over a year after Hitchbot met its untimely end. Mark Balmer, a writer and environmental activist, began his ambitious plan to walk across America, barefoot, to raise awareness about the urgent dangers of climate change and the inexplicable political inaction around this global, existential issue. On October 14, 2016, Balmer left his home in Providence, Rhode Island, with the aim of making it to the southern tip of the country before the official arrival of winter. Being a savvy millennial, he documented his progress on social media, and the first entry on his blog reads as follows: I woke up at 5 a.m. My plan was to leave at 6 a.m. I was not done packing. It took me 6 hours to pack. I left the house at noon. It was sunny. I said goodbye to a few of the special people in my life. Then I began running barefoot across America. I felt very excited. My body was not quite as heavy as it used to be. It was like some large weights had been lifted from my back. The day had finally arrived. I was actually running barefoot across America. After I turned onto Garfield Street, my phone told me to take the Washington Secondary Trail. I followed this trail from Cranston to Warwick. It was a very nice trail. I saw a guy running in barefoot shoes. A very small bear or dog tried to injure me with its voice. 2 old people held hands and nodded at me. A policeman on a bicycle pedaled very fast on the verge of a mental breakdown. Some teenagers yelled bad words in a tunnel. Some other teenagers were doing massive amounts of ice cream near a picnic table. I passed a baseball field that was almost dead, at least until next year. Some men were dumping hot cement where the humans who paid them said to dump it. From this entry in his online journal, one can already get a sense of Balmer's whimsical, literary spirit, which often hovers somewhere between Donald Barthelme and the middle voice of the McSweeney stable of phonape and post-ironic authors. His posthumously collected writings are full of surreal images, self-deprecating gestures, wry observations, and witty non-sequiturs. The longer he walks along the unforgiving roads of his native country, however, without even the buffer of a thin sole of rubber, his thoughts become less precious and mannered, and more sincere and simply sad. A month into his journey, on November 19, 2016, Balmer writes, "As I walked last night, I listened to a man explain why the Earth we had once known was already dead. There's already too much carbon in the atmosphere. Too many glaciers have already melted. The ocean is becoming more and more acidic. We can't reverse the damage we've already done. You can glue a broken light bulb back together and it might still work, but the light will never be the same. So I guess I woke up on a dead planet. It still felt sort of alive. I still felt sort of alive. I hope people don't think there's nothing worth saving even though the Earth we grew up on is already dead. The more gas-guzzling beasts rush past him, carrying their cargo of humans, ranging from the indifferent to the hostile, the more he is troubled by the evident consequences of our actions in this late era of the Anthropocene. As Bulmer walked through the Carolinas and into Georgia, his reflections seemed to become darker and heavier with every step, suggesting that this publicity stunt was less a motivated form of raising funds and awareness than a final march towards infinite resignation. We might all have the same brain, he writes. Unfortunately, I think the brain is dying. He continues, somehow we must accept life after the brain, or we must accept Earth post-brain. This is a little sad, but brains were never constructed to outlive Earth. Even though I am not sure if I can live without a brain, I'm pretty sure Earth will continue without the brain. When my brain dies, hopefully I will remember to walk out into the forest and sit down in the pine needles if there are still pine needles out in the forest. There was something messianic about Bulmer's mission, and his deep need to at once witness, absorb, and embody our collective violence towards the planet and all its inhabitants. And while he did not seem to believe our kind was in any way redeemable, he still wanted to do something exceptional in order to at least acknowledge our sins, if not exactly atone for them. Which makes it all the more disturbing that, at that uncanny age of 33, Bulmer was struck and killed by an SUV while walking along Highway 90, under the blazing Florida sun. The last photo posted to his online journal, which was presciently called "Not Going to Make It," focuses on a yellow arrow spray-painted on the road, next to his surprisingly unblistered feet. Below the arrow, also spray-painted in yellow, is the single word, "Killed." A few hours earlier, on that same fateful day, Bulmer typed out one of the last thoughts he would get to share with the world. When I began walking, I had an urge to stop traffic until all the roads in America died.